what is in MMA rebirth?
I'm glad you asked.
Oftentimes, when a fighter reaches the age range of 32 to 35 years, we see the infamous age curse, where they begin losing fights, giving lackluster performances, or flat out retiring from the sport. Other times, it's an entirely mental block that keeps a prime hungry fighter from achieving potential peaks. Famously, the Great Brian Ortega coined this term as a scientific explanation for why so many fighters are never the same once they hit this wall, and yet he laid out the blueprint on how to not only survive, but thrive in your 30s and onward.
The rebirth it's basically a man or an individual human having to come face to face with themselves in the mirror and really change all the bad things about you that in the long run will break you.
He taught the MMA community about the fully fact-checked scientific research behind the eagle and behind a rebirth. Step 1 of a rebirth.
At the 40-year mark, the eagle loses the sharpness of its beak, the feathers aren't as good, and its talons are weak. So it has a choice. The choice is to die, keep doing what you're doing, living the way you are, or isolate yourself way up in the mountains.
Find a hammer, begin bone smashing your jaw to the point where you need a steel wire to repair and shut your jaw bones. Allow those shattered bones to fuse together and form a granite, unbreakable Chad-like chin. Once you've done that, you must raw knuckle, no glove shadow box with a metal pole wrapped in razor wire. The skin on your hands will develop into a fibrous, leathery texture from scar tissue, making them immune to lacerations or abrasions, all while you develop hands of stone and knockout power from the knuckle bone regrowth. Finally, the fighter must either shave their head or take on a whole new style for their hair as a symbolic gesture of great change and new beginnings. Of course, I'm translating this from eagle to human, but we will be naming titles of eagle rebirths nonetheless. Nonetheless, we're talking about smashed expectations, revitalizations, and the best return to forms by MMA fighters. Let's get started. The story of Ortega himself was when he big-dicked the weak Yair Rodriguez by taking every single one of his best shots, almost being 10-7 in the first round, and then coming back the next to submit him effortlessly. All of this while being a 2-1 underdog who many fans wrote off as being washed, undeserving of his ranking, overhyped, but now he is adored by American, Latinos, and 30-year-old men trying to make things right with their baby mamas. So, with Ortega setting the tone for this list, who else is deserving of the title Rebirth and the even greater title Eagle? This is going to take some of you by surprise, particularly those that are unwashed and artless, but there is one old head legacy fighter who has most recently earned the name Eagle. Anthony Lionheart Smith. Anthony Eagleheart Smith? The Moscow Mueller is perhaps the most overly disrespected man in the MMA space, purely because he has a few extreme takes that plenty of YouTubers and analysts also have. But the difference is he's a ranked, currently competing old head fighter with the job on the analyst desk. When Michael Bisping or Lucas Tracy have something to say about a fighter being good or washed up or being a fucking fraud ass bitch, nobody bats an eye. But when Lionheart says that Alex Pereira is an incomplete MMA fighter and that he doesn't have as wide of a skill set,
Anthony Smith, give him 5 minutes. He takes my back, finishes me.
Suddenly he's a hyper-delusional that should never consider himself better than anybody in the top 5. Guess what, gentlemen? Anthony Smith does have a broader set of MMA skills than Alex Pereira. He's simply not elite in any specific aspect, unlike Pereira, who is a master kickboxer. With Smith being a jack of all trades and a master of none, it's made his career full of ups and downs. Particularly the 3-year span between 2019 and 2022, where the holes in Smith's game were exposed and marked the end of an era. Many felt that his time on the ranked ladder was due. John Jones, Glover Teixeira, Alexander Rakic, Magomed Ankalaev, Anthony was being busted up and battered by the elite of the division, and the fan base pretty much just wanted him gone. Well, guess what? This sport needs gatekeepers, and especially needs reliable ones. Too often in other divisions, guys will leapfrog massively into the rankings without earning their keep because they're the UFC's pet project. Sean O'Malley, Umar Nurmagomedov, Islam Makhachev, Michael Chandler, the list goes on, in which fighters are not running the gauntlet to earn their position. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it's a good old-fashioned fraud check. Anthony Smith proved himself to be the marquee gatekeeper of the UFC and has consistently taken on young, hungry, untested up-and-comers that other ranked fighters don't want to risk their spot against. Devin Clark, Jimmy Crute, Ryan Spann, all imposing, intimidating guys with momentum that hadn't seen all that much resistance. And each time Smith wiped the floor with them, showed them levels, freaking disposed of them within a round because he is elite. Yet, he still found a way to be underrated and disrespected because he fell to guys like Ankalaev and Johnny Walker and Khalil Roundtree, on short notice by the way. All three of them elite. Yes, Johnny Walker is elite.
What's up, my niggas?
The narrative was that Lionheart was finished. They wrote off his hard-earned rematch against Ryan Spann as a fluke due to Spann's dumb fight IQ. So when once again Anthony Smith got the call to put his number 10 spot on the line against the juice-maxed, needle-maxed lab experiment with 4 UFC fights, he answers. Smith pounded his last Moscow Mule for that morning, chugged a Gatorade, then got straight into training camp. The odds skyrocketed for Petrino at -600. Mind you, this is the fucking bum that went to competitive decisions with the semi-retired version of Tyson Pedro and an early pleasure man, Anton Turkalj. Mind you, I'm not a pleasure man hater. I simply accept that he is not that good. So, with Smith at plus 425 underdog, disrespected, disregarded as a washed-up geriatric with a disappointingly low muscle and low T frame, with the whole community against him, Anthony Smith outmaneuvers and forces the juicehead into the most textbook, locked-in guillotine you've ever seen! Guess what, MMA Guru? Guillotines do work in high-level MMA, and the top 10 of light heavyweight is high-level, and you can't convince me otherwise with how smooth and buttery Smith took this victory with the guillotine. Anthony, with the help of the Lord, single-handedly won me $2,500 on a $5 13-leg parlay bet with his absolute masterclass over TRT Vitor. Petrino. I know that people like Guru, Lucas Tracy, MMA Che, Pick'em, Hoppero MMA, Volkanovski, Money Moicano all had him completely and entirely counted out and considered this whole fight a wash that was purely a result of UFC trying to get Smith out of the rankings. Well, guess what?
Anthony Smith was going to fraud check Vitor Petrino. Salutito.
This performance not only earns the Smith the title of elite gatekeeper, it also earns him the title of Eagle. Now, this might be a head scratcher to some of you, but for those Southern Cali dogs that came up out of the trenches, you'll know where I'm coming from when I say that bombastic, bodacious, blicky-bustin' Bobby Green is a true reborn Eagle if there's ever been one. He may have slipped under the radar of the fan base in this aspect, but make no mistake, this is a man that has been counted out time and time again throughout his last 13 years in the big leagues. After being transferred to the UFC from his 4-fight Strikeforce win streak, a young 26-year-old Bobby Green went on to rack up another 4 wins in a row in the UFC before losing an honestly close fight to a young Edson Barboza. And then he was KO'd for the first time in the promotion by Dustin Poirier. The next 4 years of his career would be back and forth, 3 wins, 2 losses, 2 wins, 2 losses, all to mostly top-level competition and mostly close decisions as well. Before we knew it, time flew by, Bobby Green was 36 and being fed to up-and-comers Islam Makhachev and Drew Dober, trying to be slowly dripped out of the promotion by the UFC, similar to Anthony Smith. Wait, does anybody else hear what I'm hearing?
Eagle! Eagle! Woo! Woo!
That's right. We all know a real group home hopping, foster parent terrorizing, fatherless thug like Green isn't going to stand by and let that happen. So when the UFC had their new rags to riches druggy story in Jared Gordon, they wanted Bobby to play jobber for him. All respects to Jared, but he is simply no match. King Green jumped out in the first round and speared a lead elbow / crown strike combo, the first we've ever seen in the UFC, and knocked Gordon unconscious. Yet, the fight was somehow called a no contest. Look, everybody watching that fight knew that was a legitimate combination and should have been scored a win. Nonetheless, the UFC, unsatisfied with the outcome, wanted to give the fellow aging vet Tony Ferguson a supposed free win against Bobby Green. And what do you know? King Green, draped in all red down to his socks, he submits Tony faster than anyone in the UFC ever has, with 5 seconds left in the fight. And he earns himself a performance bonus. We all know where $50,000 is going when you give it to somebody like Bobby Green. Bah, bah, bah. Now, I know what you Green haters are going to say. He's annoying, he was never that good, he has a white foster dad, he's a fake thug. I don't want to hear it. I've been watching MMA since 2007. I know a real goon, a real eagle when I see one. Case and point. His next fight in the UFC, which they still wanted him gone, where his rebirth would truly shine against Grant Dawson, the surging young contender. 91% of people on prediction sites were picking Grant Dawson because of the narrative that Bobby can't deal with grapplers, that he'll keep his hands too low and get caught up top and then thrown to the ground. Green is too old to ever be ranked in the modern era. Well, guess what? After Dawson emerged as a 5-1 favorite on the betting odds, I will never forget where I was when I watched Bobby Green put little, soft, stable family home Grant Dawson in a fetal position from the first punch he landed 30 seconds into the fight, propelling himself into the rankings at 37 years of age. The rest was just a cherry on top, taking an actual zero-chance fight against Jalen Turner. He was never winning that. We all knew it. And instead of complaining about the stoppage like everybody else, he just shrugged his shoulders and said,
I don't know, man. What the fuck, man? That's the fucking game. Like, I guess it could have been stopped like a little something, like, whatever. That's the game.
Based. I was surprised to see when the UFC 300 fight was announced against Jim Miller that multiple big-name MMA analysts, like the MMA Guru, like Lucas Tracy, were picking crafty vet Jim Miller. What do you know? Old Man Green puts a fucking embarrassing clinic on Jim Miller. He 30-25's Old Man Jim, and I feel bad for him. I'm a Jim Miller fan. He has been fighting a little bit longer than I've been watching the sport. It's nuts. Regardless, he proved he is still a big cut above the unranked journeyman, and until proven otherwise, he deserves his ranking and deserves his eagle status. A fellow UFC 300 dog that has been firing up social media and getting the masses hyped. Manny Moicano, motherfucker! Moicano is someone that was lighting up the MMA world upon his entry as a rookie, but unfortunately fell to both injuries and inactivity, taking only 4 fights in his first 4 years in the UFC. And he would ultimately end up falling first to the alpha eagle himself, Brian Ortega. But he would prove to be as game as they come, decisively beating ranked opponents like Calvin Kattar and Cub Swanson. But he simply couldn't get past the elites, being knocked out by Jose Aldo and the Korean Zombie and Rafael Fiziev in an unfortunate 2-year skid. With this, his skills on the mic weren't able to present themselves, as he wouldn't make it to any big press conferences nor get post-fight interviews, and the interest that big-name journalists had in interviewing him was beginning to wane. Yet, Moicano had a true epiphany, and lying asleep one night on the floor of his Florida apartment, he had a night terror that changed him forever. He realized he cannot afford to lose! He would make a quick and easy fight out of Jai Herbert and Alexander Hernandez, submitting both of these bums on the ground. He then stepped up on super short notice for Rafael Fiziev and fought the menacing vet RDA in a loss that no one would hold against him. Yet as we know, he cannot afford to lose, and so he bounced back against Brad Riddell, turning him into Bum Riddell, choking him out in the first round. Even still, Moicano was not getting any real respect for treating these journeymen like kids in their first jiu-jitsu class, and after a 14-month layoff due to another unfortunate injury, Moicano hits a breakneck pace and takes 2 bouts within 2 months of each other. First, going to a war and dispatching a game Drew Dober, who did whip Renato's head back multiple times, busting his face open, but giving Moicano the opportunity to fight for his life, which we know he always will. And after scraping by in that decision, he was fully unsatisfied with his performance. Money was on the table, and he steps up to fight the surging 6'3", weight bully, lank-maxing dickhead in Jalen Turner. In a fight that almost no MMA analyst gave him the nod in, Moicano came for the cash. Turner was looking for his movie highlight $300,000 bonus moment, and he sat Renato down with a big left and walked away.
Oh my gosh! Why didn't he finish him?
After watching Renato still be conscious with a guard up, mind you, this wasn't somebody that just smashed the back of their head into the canvas. He was there, he was awake, and Jalen still tried to turn and shrug him off. I guess all of that weight cutting actually did affect him, drying up an already shriveled brain and turning him retarded. Moicano was up within 2 seconds, and Jalen still put his hands out to question the GOAT Herb Dean. The second round comes, and as a 3-1 favorite, Turner caves to warm-up punches on the ground and stops defending himself, quitting to the awesome might of a newly reborn Eagle, Money Moicano. He is in his Eagle era right now, and no matter how his career goes from here on out, he will always have these awesome mic moments and a devout following of his economic advice. Moicano has a whole lot to look forward to, not just to his next fight, but even to his next career. So, as we've found, Eagles can be anywhere, especially where you least expect them, and even more so where you may least want them. I haven't forgotten how much hate was being brought down onto Brian Ortega before he dishonored and humbled Yair. People did not want a new Ortega era, but now that he's here, he has a new fan base, tons of love from the community. Smith. We all know the story of Smith. He has 500 videos about him right now about what a delusional fuckhead he is. But he proved him wrong. He can be a bit of a fuckhead still, but he is no longer delusional because he proved that Petrino's just a big buffoon oaf with power and strength. It's a dangerous game to doubt an Eagle, and unfortunately, we often don't know that we have one in our midst until it's too late. So keep your eyes open, keep your eyes keen like an Eagle, learn to block out the noise and recognize the next rebirth. I'm going to be having a second video on this topic pretty soon. And big shout out to the MMA channel Rigo for supporting me in this new project. Check out his content. That's Rigo. It's based, it's captivating, it's almost as good as mine. But this was my first ever MMA video. I am Makata Arts. Please let me know if it was fresh, if it was ass. I'm going to be doing a whole lot more coming up. I'm going to have tier lists, I'm going to have takes, I'm going to have deep dives, mini documentaries like this. Thank you again for watching. See you soon.